Hey now Brawlers, today we're going to take a look at the DC Comics deck building game Crisis Expansion Pack 1, which is quite a mouthful. This is the latest expansion for the DC Comics deck building game from Cryptozoic Entertainment, hereafter called the DC Deck Builder because the name is just very cumbersome. Anyways, this is one of several games that Cryptozoic Entertainment has in their lineup that uses the Cerberus deck building engine. There's Lord of the Rings, Street Fighter, upcoming Naruto game. You're able to mix all of them together, theoretically, if you're willing to massage a few rules here and there. But the DC Comics game was the first one. There's actually two versions of the DC Deck Builder. You have the base set, you have the Heroes Unite set, you've got some promos in there, and now you have the Crisis Expansion Pack 1. Now, some of the things that come in this box are just new stuff that you can just mix in with the original sets with no kind of big rule changes. You have some new heroes, you have harder, impossible supervillains that you can add in, and you have some new main deck cards as well. Some of the new heroes are some of the more off-the-wall, darker heroes of the DC universe, like Constantine, who's got a show coming up, and Swamp Thing, Animal Man, some really cool characters. There's finally an actual Green Arrow superhero card for you to play as. So all that stuff is just normal stuff you can mix into the base game, but now they have a new Crisis Mode, which is where the expansion gets its name from. Now, if you don't know, and I'm not going to go into all the details of the DC Deck Builder in my overview, so if you want to know more, you can look at my previous reviews for those games, for that and the Heroes Unite set. But a lot of people complain about the DC Deck Builder because while it's a neat game, it's got the Ascension style deck building mechanics, it is not very thematic at all. Or should I say that there is a theme to it and it's terrible. Because you're supposed to be superheroes of the Justice League or their friends working together to go through a pile of supervillains and defeat all their little henchmen and stuff, and that's great. Except that you're competing against each other and you're taking villain cards into your deck to attack the other members of the Justice League, and you're buying kicks with punches. Well, that's a whole other thing, but so the theme, even though I like the games, the theme really sucks. The Crisis Expansion Pack is sort of Cryptozoic's way to try and remedy that, because it adds a full-on cooperative mode, where in fact they add new versions of the original heroes from the base set, new Crisis modes, where Crisis Mode heroes, where everyone has an ability that can actually help the other players. And you're going through different Crisis cards that represent some of the famous crises from the DC universe, and like I said, you're fighting the impossible supervillains who are much tougher because now you're all working together against them, and you're trying to beat the clock because eventually that main deck is going to run out, and then if you haven't beat all the supervillains by then, the game is going to be over. So it does make the game more thematic, but is it going to be enough to bring people who were not a fan of the DC Deck Builder's theme back into the fold? Well, I went ahead and played it a few times. Let's do a brief overview of what comes in the box, then we'll come back. I'll let you know what I think. Okay, I'm just going to give you a brief run through of the stuff that comes in the Crisis Expansion Pack 1 for the DC Comics deck building game. Now, I'm not going to go through all the rules of the actual DC Comics deck builder. If you want to know how to play the game, or just a brief overview of it anyways, you can check out my other videos on the main game and on the expansion standalone game Heroes Unite. And you can actually use this expansion pack, Crisis Pack 1, with either of the base set or the Heroes Unite set, or mix and match them as you please. It's fully integrated with both. Now, a lot of the stuff that comes in this game can be used in the competitive game, but a lot of it is specifically meant for the Crisis Mode, which is a new cooperative mode where all the players are teaming up to destroy all the supervillains in the stack. But let's go through the stuff that can be integrated into the competitive mode as well as the cooperative mode. So first, you get a bunch of brand new superheroes to use. Just like with the other heroes and the other sets, you'll just shuffle these up and deal them out if you want to add them to the current roster of heroes that you have. And you have ones like Robin here, who I think this is like Damian Robin. I don't know, I'm so out of it by this point, but special ability. The first time a card tells you to draw a card during each of your turns, you may instead put an equipment from your discard pile into your hand. You have Green Arrow, who acts like a souped-up version of the Green Arrow bow card. Once during each of your turns, you can discard a punch card. If you do, pay 2 less to defeat villains and supervillains this turn. Constantine, who's getting his own show soon. Once during each of your turns, reveal the top card of your deck. If its cost is 1 or greater, you may play it and has +1 power, but if you do, you destroy it at the end of your turn. Animal Man, during each of your turns, if you have played 3 or more different card types, you get +2 power. Swamp Thing. During your turn, you are considered to control each location in the lineup and in play. That's actually really ridiculously cool. And Zatanna Zatara. Once during each of your turns, you may put a card with cost 1 or greater from your hand on the bottom of your deck. If you do, draw a card. Again, this is like a souped up version of her normal hero card from the base set. Then you've got some main deck cards that you can just shuffle into either of the main decks of the other two sets. And I'm not going to go through every single one, but here's some of the most notable ones. And these are also clearly noted by a little crisis symbol down here, which is a good thing. It was kind of hard to tell the other expansion cards apart. But in any case, you have Magic, Superpower. Choose a card you played this turn, play it again this turn, and then destroy it. I like that card a lot. The Rot, a new location. The first time you play a weakness or vulnerability during each of your turns, you draw a card. Signature Trenchcoat. You may gain a card with cost 5 or less from the destroyed pile if you choose not to, +2 power. And that is incredibly important for the crisis mode crisis mode method of play, which we'll get to in a minute. House of Mystery. The first time you play a card with cost 5 or greater during each of your turns, draw a card. Magician's Corset. I love this card, and this is another one that really shines in the cooperative crisis mode. Choose any number of players. Each of those players draws a card, +1 power for each player who draws a card this way, including you. Captain Atom. You may gain a card with cost 4 or less from the lineup and then put it into any player's hand. If you choose not to, +2 power. Avatar of the Rot. Go take a good look at that handsome fella. +3 power. Attack. Each foe gains 2 weakness cards. John Constantine himself. Reveal the top 2 cards of your deck and draw one of them. Put the other on top of your deck or destroy it. And finally, Power of the Red. Discard any number of cards and then draw that many cards. There's other ones too, but I thought these were some of the most interesting. Now, that's all the stuff that can be easily integrated into the main game. Let's look at some of the stuff that's really meant for only the Crisis Mode. But first, a little explanation as to how Crisis Mode works. For the most part, you play it exactly the same as the base rules of the DC Deck Builder, but you have a few changes. First and foremost, when the normal villain cards come into the lineup, and when I say normal villain cards, I mean any kind of card like this happy fellow here, the red bordered villain cards. When those enter into the lineup, you can defeat them just as with anything else, but when you defeat them in the crisis mode, you don't put them into your deck. Instead, they go into the destroyed pile. So that's why cards like the Signature Trenchcoat are important, because the only way to get powerful villain cards into your deck is to pull them out of the destroyed pile. But not only that, while you can buy any other kind of card as normal, once you fill up the lineup with your 5 cards like you do in any normal game at the beginning of a Crisis Mode game, after that you do not fill up the cards that you bought at the end of your turn. Instead, automatically at the end of every single turn, you're going to take a card from the main deck and you're going to put it into the lineup. The reason for this is because the main deck acts as a clock. If the main deck of cards runs out in Crisis Mode, the heroes lose. You have to defeat all of the supervillains that are going to be in the stack of supervillains, impossible supervillains, excuse me, before the main deck runs out, and then you will win the game. Now, that's a little harder than you might think, because not only do you have to defeat all the impossible supervillains, you also have to deal with the crisis cards that come out. And crisis cards are like powerful effects that are going to affect everyone in play until you can surpass them. But there's an order of operations. In order to even challenge and beat the crisis, you need to make sure that the main deck lineup is free of any and all villain cards. Then you can beat the crisis, and then if all the villains are gone, the current crisis is gone, then you can defeat the current supervillain that's on the top of the stack. Then at the end of the turn, you get a new crisis, do what it tells you to do, then you get a new impossible supervillain. So let's take a look at some of these crisis cards. You always start with Arkham Breakout. Ongoing, when a villain with an attack enters the lineup, treat it as if it were a first appearance attack against all players. To beat this, each player must secretly place a card from his hand face down and then discard them. If each card has a different name, remove this crisis. In order to beat a crisis, you only get 1 shot per player turn. If you screwed that up, you'd have to wait until the next turn and hopefully you can get it right the next time. Here's another example. Death in the Family. At the start of your turn, destroy a hero in the lineup. If there are none to destroy, add the top card of the main deck to the lineup. To beat, each player must destroy a defense card in their hand. Rise of the Rot. At the start of your turn, gain a weakness unless you reveal one from your hand. Each player must discard a weakness card in order to beat it. Also remove the crisis if the weakness stack runs out. But if that happens, you're screwed anyways. Untouchable Villain. At the start of your turn, add the top card of the main deck to the lineup. If it's not a villain, discard a card. To beat it, each player must destroy 8 cost worth of cards in his hand. Collapsing Parallel Worlds. This one is brutal. Ongoing, each player places all cards he buys or gains from the lineup under this card, including villains. To beat it, remove the Crisis when there are 10 cards under this card, and then one player destroys his deck and discard pile. The cards under this Crisis become his new deck. This is even more devastating the later you have to deal with it. And then you have Final Countdown. At the start of your turn, put a card with cost 1 or greater from your hand into the lineup. To beat it, your team must destroy cards in the lineup with cost 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, and 2. Now, the thing about the Crisis cards is that there's a lot of them here, but you may not use all of them depending on the number of players in the game. The number of impossible supervillains and Crisis cards that you have to deal with is very dependent on how many players there are. That'll tell you how many random ones to use, and then you'll put them in there. But you always start with the Arkham Breakout for the Crisis cards. For the impossible supervillains, much like in the base set, you're going to start with the impossible Ra's al Ghul. Now, if you're playing in the Crisis mode, and you can use this in competitive mode if you want to, then you ignore all of their actual abilities that you would use if they're in your deck, because they'll never go in your deck. When you defeat an impossible supervillain, they're removed from the game. But here's their stack ongoing effect, which means this is what happens to all the cooperating players when he's on the top of the stack. At the end of your turn, if you did not buy or gain a card from the lineup, add the top card of the main deck to the lineup, in addition to the normal one, so he makes the clock run out faster. Another example, Hades, first appearance attack. Each player puts the top 2 cards of the main deck into the lineup, gain weaknesses equal to the cost of one of those cards. That is such a terrible card. Terrible, like horrifying. Sinestro, stack ongoing. Sinestro costs 3 more to defeat for each hero in the lineup. First appearance attack. Each player puts all heroes from his hand into the lineup. Deathstroke. Each player destroys a hero, superpower, and equipment in his hands. And every game, this has a different back because every game of Crisis mode is going to end with the Crisis Anti-Monitor. Stack ongoing. Whenever a hero is added to the lineup, each player puts a weakness from the stack on top of his deck. I hate that. And Crisis Anti-Monitor costs 1 more to defeat for each card in the lineup. Each player must defeat this villain to win the game. So that's a very, very difficult way in order to end the game. One thing I do want to note, I just kind of had this thought, is that there's actually some impossible villains who you cannot block their attack. Lex Luthor is an example. This attack can't be avoided. Each player gains X weaknesses, where X is equal to the highest victory point value among cards in hand. So some of these impossible supervillains are really hard. And again, the only way that you're going to be able to even beat them is by defeating every villain in the lineup, beating the Crisis, then beating the impossible supervillain, and then doing it all over again. Now, of course, in order to make it a little bit easier on you, they give you some new heroes. You're probably wondering what this stack was here this whole time. These are Crisis Mode superheroes. These are new versions of all of the original Justice League members from the base set, plus the Martian Manhunter, who was originally a promo. And they have powers that make them a little more suited to cooperative play. So Superman says, once during each of your turns, if you play 7 or greater costs worth of superpowers, choose a player. That player draws a card. Batman, once during each of your turns, if you have played 2 or more equipment, you may choose a player. That player discards his hand and then draws 1 fewer cards than he discarded. So that's kind of a tricky one to use, but basically if someone has a crap hand, give them a new one. Green Lantern, when any player is attacked, you may discard 3 cards. If you do, that player avoids the attack. Wonder Woman, when you buy or gain a villain from the lineup, choose a player. That player may destroy a vulnerability or weakness in his hand or discard pile. I could make an argument that is actually kind of useful in the competitive game. The Flash, you go first, of course. Once during each of your turns, if you have played 8 or more cards, choose a player. That player draws a card. Aquaman, when you buy or gain a card with cost 5 or less during your turn, you may place it into any player's discard pile. That is strictly only useful for cooperative mode. Martian Manhunter, once during each of your turns, if you have played 2 or more heroes, choose a player. That player may put a hero from his discard pile on top of his deck. And Cyborg, once during each of your turns, if you have played a superpower and equipment, you may put a card with cost 1 or greater from any player's discard pile on the bottom of the main deck, which could give you a little more time. So that's really what comes in this box. You have a lot of cards that can be used in the main competitive game, but most of the cards are used specifically for the Crisis mode. Now let's get to my final thoughts. Okay, I'm going to break my final opinion into two parts. The first part is going to be talking about the new stuff that comes in the box that can be integrated into the original sets in the competitive mode. The second part is going to be about the crisis mode and how all those cards work together in the cooperative mode. So, as far as the new stuff that you can add to the competitive mode, that is, you have new superheroes like Green Arrow, Swamp Thing, Animal Man that you can play as. And you also have new cards that you can mix into the main deck, some of which are a little more suited towards a cooperative play, but that work just fine in the competitive mode as well, if not better. And then you can actually go ahead if you want to and use the impossible supervillains in your competitive mode as well. They work perfectly fine. They're just a little rougher on the players. But in exchange, they're a little more powerful than their normal counterparts. For instance, sometimes in not so tremendous a way. Like, for instance, the Impossible Parallax says that you double your power still, but you also get to draw a card. Well, that's not a huge thing, but it is more powerful, and I believe that Lex Luthor's card, instead of just drawing 3 cards, you draw 4 cards. So they're a little more powerful, but you have to work a little harder to survive their onslaught. You can mix all this stuff into the main set. You can even use the Crisis superheroes if you wanted to, like the new versions of the Justice League. I wouldn't recommend it. I've heard some people say that some of them are quite good when you use them in the competitive game, but I would disagree. I don't think I'd want to play as most of them in the competitive game because they're really meant for the crisis mode. Like, why would I want to, like, if I was the new Aquaman, why would I want to put cards into other players' decks? I mean, you could do that with, no, it's cards that you buy, so you can't even do it with weaknesses. So I don't agree with that, but all the other stuff can easily be integrated into competitive mode, and it's a lot of fun. So I think that based just on that, if you really like the DC Comics deck building game, and you can get this for fairly cheap, I got it for about $14, I think it's worth it just for that. The new heroes are really interesting. I like Swamp Thing's ability a lot, where he can effectively use any location that's out there in the playing area. I like Animal Man's ability, and actually Animal Man's cards in the main deck, about how having different types of cards with these are actually little thematic things that are really cool about the characters, and I dig that. Green Arrow effectively acts like a souped-up version of his, like, Green Arrow's bow card from the original base set. All this stuff is pretty cool. Same thing with the Zatanna. And some of the cards that are in the main deck, especially Constantine's cards, I like a lot, about looking through your deck and destroying cards, keeping some, sort of that occultist thing. You know, people complain about DC Deck Builder not having theme, and I agree most of the time, but little things like that are pretty cool. It's a lot of the stuff that we see happening in Legendary as well. So, based just on that, I would say this expansion is worth a purchase if you like playing the competitive DC Deck Builder. Now, let's go to the Crisis Mode. The Crisis Mode is terrible. It's terrible. I'm sorry. I wanted so badly to love this. You have no idea, because even though I like the game, I'm one of those people that had a problem with the theme. Why are we not cooperating? We're the Justice League. Why are we not working together against these supervillains? So when I first heard this expansion pack announced, I was like, fantastic. Finally, they're going to add something for people like me who want that cooperative aspect. And to be sure, the ideas that are present in this expansion are very, very neat. I didn't know too much about it because I hadn't really been, looking at all the different card, preview artwork for some of the cards that were coming out before the set was actually released. So I just knew it was going to add a cooperative mode. So when I actually busted it open and looked at all the cards, I'm like, wow, this is really cool. All the Crisis cards are like famous events from the DC history, and yeah, it's reused art and stuff like that, but who cares? That's what all the game is anyways. It looks cool. I mean, and some of them are a little more thematic than others and how they're integrated into the game. Some of them are really neat ideas, like the collapsing parallel worlds, I believe it is, where you buy the only way to beat the Crisis is by buying cards, putting them underneath it, and then that deck of cards becomes someone else's deck. You have to destroy all the rest of them. It's devastating, but it's neat. Stuff like that is really cool. Here's the problem. As cool as it is to have these cards and the impossible supervillains and have everyone working together with, if you use the Crisis Mode superheroes with their new powers that can help each other, it is excruciatingly long and boring to actually implement all of this into the game. You have turns and turns and turns and turns where you can just do nothing effective because you cannot get past the Crisis. Okay? And there are while you're trying to get through this crisis because you can't meet some specific set of requirements, like having everyone just destroy a card or discard a card off the top of their deck and having it be of a certain amount or different or whatever it might be, or having to discard a certain set of cards or discarding one at random and making sure that it's not a 0. While all of that might be thematic to working together and whatever the particular crisis is, it's also incredibly boring and frustrating because you cannot count on that ever happening. And there, like I said, there's long turns where you can't get through it. And if you can't get through it, and all of you and the people that you're playing with have wiped out everything from the lineup, wiped out all the villains, gained all the cards that are coming out, because even so, because you don't fill up the lineup from buying, only one card comes out every turn, unless you have Ra's al Ghul in play, and even then that's only if you don't buy anything from the lineup. So one card per turn, and if you can't get through the crisis, what are you going to do? Whoever his turn it is just is stuck buying that card and waiting and waiting and waiting until you can actually get through the crisis. Otherwise, you're just accruing all of this power, getting all these cool combos to work with your cards finally, and you're all dressed up and no place to go because you can't do anything with that power until you get through the crisis. So man, it just seemed like such a neat idea, to give you a reason to fight the villains in the lineup and to get through this crisis and then to fight the supervillain. All that seemed like such a great idea that was just implemented poorly. To give you an idea of the length of this, I played a 5-player game of this. Now, I'll admit, a 5-player game, even in the competitive mode, is probably a bad idea because the strength of the DC deck builder is that it can be quick. When you have 5 players, it tends to drag on. But hey, it's cooperative mode. You don't have to worry about building your deck as much, so it doesn't matter if a card's not there when it gets all the way around to you anymore. Just take something else. But that really dragged it out. It was over 3 hours. 3 hours! I'm telling you, and I wasn't playing with a bunch of people that were new to it. Maybe one person was, but everyone was familiar with deck building games. It was terrible. So, okay, that's fine. I played a few games solo. How did those go? Over 2 hours. And the last one I played went 90 minutes. And granted, I'm by myself, so I get distracted by some things, but it's too long. Turn after turn after turn where I was doing nothing because I couldn't do anything. Where I literally had so much recruitment power available. I'm using a legendary terminology. I had so much power available, but the only thing I could get was kicks. And at a certain point, I'm like, my deck is enormous. I'm not buying more kicks because they do nothing for me. Oh man, I'm just so disappointed in that mode and the potential that it could have had, but it is the epitome of a tacked on mechanic. That it was not thought out very well, that they just threw in there because like, let's see, I want to add some new stuff to the game, but here, take this too to quit your whining about this not being co-op. That's what this feels like. I can think of a few things they could change to make it better, like maybe saying that no matter what, the main lineup gets wiped out except for villains every turn, and new cards get added. That way you're milling through the deck faster, you have more things to buy, and yeah, that makes the game, the timer going faster because the game can end in your defeat if that main deck runs out, but maybe you make it a little easier to get through the crisis in exchange for that. So just anything to get the game moving faster and that you feel more excited. I would never ever play this co-op mode against like any other superhero cooperative game, Legendary, Sentinels of the Multiverse, whatever. I mean, already DC Comics was the third tier of that lineup, but now even more so. So very, very sad that they couldn't get this one right. I guess the fact that it's called Expansion Pack 1 is saying there's going to be more of these. I hope that they do something to improve the time and excitement because this game has some serious problems in those two factors. But like I said, the stuff in this set that it can be put into the competitive mode is really cool. So if you love the game, this is still probably worth a buy, but just know what you're getting into with that crisis mode because it is not all it's cracked up to be. My name is Nick, this has been Board Game Brawl, and I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day and in every way. Take care.